Hi everyone, my name's Eric. Thanks for watching this. I am here to convince you to try to read one of my favorite novels, probably my favorite novel of all time, The Wizard Knight by Gene Wolfe. This is the tattered, much-used copy I bought, I think in 2005 or 4, I don't quite remember when it first came out. And it increases the pleasure of reading to me to think that I'm reading the same copy that I did when I was in my early 30s and reading this for the first time and just had no idea of what I was getting into. This book gets to me. This book does things to me that no other book does. And I'm constantly trying to find people to loan it to, and then I'm pestering them to see if they've read it, and if they don't like it, I just never speak to them again. No, I'm kidding. That's okay. And in fact, toward the end of this recommendation, not really a book review, a recommendation, I'm going to tell you why it's okay if you don't like it and why you might not. There are 3 reasons why I just absolutely love this book. If, like me, you like epic fantasy, swords, knights, dragons, giants, castles, fair maidens, and all that, you will have a fantastic time with this book. In terms of genre expectations, if epic fantasy is your cup of tea, this is a huge, warm, wonderful cup for you to drink from. And he writes all this stuff really, really well. The bad guys and the monsters are really threatening and frightening. The battles are exciting. You don't know who's going to survive. The fantasy world has this particularly realistic quality to it for me. It doesn't feel like a made-up world. It feels like a place you could very easily go to. All the descriptions of sunlight and rocks by the seashore and forests with shadows and moss and the hard stone of castle walls, it feels very tactile and real. And the characters, Wolfe is so good with his characters at getting them all talking in these very idiosyncratic, distinct ways. He almost doesn't have to tell you who's talking. You can figure it out. It makes the characters feel very vivid. So just in terms of the story and what happens, it's really great to read. That's all fine, but there's a lot of epic fantasy out there that's already been written that's all really good. Wolfe distinguishes himself in 2 other ways, and it's the 2 other reasons why I really, really love this novel. First of all, there's a peculiar quality to the mechanics of most of Wolfe's writing and his novels and his narration that I've seen it elsewhere, but never quite in the same way or quite as intensely and determinedly and quite happening to the same extent. Over and over again in a Wolfe novel, you'll be reading along and something will happen and he won't explain why. And you don't have enough information in the novel to figure out what's going on or why. And often when I'm reading a Wolfe novel for the first time, I'll stop and think, wait, what happened? And I'll go back and think, did I miss something? And I'll read it again. I didn't miss anything. There's just no explanation. And the story just continues. As you read, though, as the pages go by, there's an explanation for everything. It always makes sense. It often just comes hundreds of pages later. So as you work through the novel, for me at least, it's the most wonderful effect of saying, oh, that leads to that, and that's connected to that, and once that happens, that explains what that was back there. And the effect of it, instead of the narrator, or Gene Wolfe himself, just telling me what the story is about, the effect of this, it's this emergent meaning that comes to you, or comes to me anyway, as you work your way through the story. The bigness and vastness of the story starts to come through. Behind the visible surface of the story, there are all these threads connecting, but Wolfe's narrators, they don't tend to say, oh, this thing that happened sure means a lot for this other thing that happens a decade later or whatever. Like, for example, the basic premise of the story is that a teenager from America winds up in a fantasy world. The conceit of the world, and I'm not spoiling anything, trust me, if you haven't read it, I'm not spoiling anything when I say this. Because the conceit of the world is that all the Norse gods are real. The Valfather and Thor and Loki and all the other gods and goddesses. You get the giants of winter and old night as well. They're all, in sober fact, characters in the story. And very, very early on in the story, the character is in a ruined castle, and he sees this massive, fierce-looking knight standing across from him, and then the knight just disappears into mist and disappears. He looks around, he's alone. And you're reading and you think, what was he hallucinating? What's going on? Now, there is an explanation for who that was and why that person is there. And when you see it, it's actually really great. It increases the thrill of reading. But you have to go for like 700 pages before someone explains who that was. For me, that doubles and trebles the pleasure of reading. I gave up on Tolstoy years ago. Not because he's a bad novelist, he's actually wonderful, but he's constantly telling me the significance of what he's narrating. So I forget where I read this, but somebody once said that Tolstoy is afflicted with perpetual clear-sightedness. He's always doing my job for me. I want the narrator to narrate, and then I want to be, cluing myself into what's going on, drawing the connections that aren't obvious, figuring out what all this stuff means. The more I can figure out as I work along, that increases my pleasure as a reader of fiction. If I'm reading nonfiction, I want, that's different. It's a different world. The way in which Wolfe communicates what the story means in this very sort of indirect, thread-like way, incredibly significant stuff will happen, and Wolfe won't trumpet it. He'll just narrate it for you, and he'll trust you to draw the connection. And the meaning that bleeds through is just massive. And for me, it increases the pleasure of reading just so far beyond even other really good writing that's out there. And I've never met anyone who quite tells a story that way. Third reason I really love Wolfe. In the thread-like character of the meaning of the story, behind the visible surface of the story that only becomes clear slowly. And this is not true of early Wolfe. He started writing in the 70s, wrote more science fiction then. The massive sort of inventiveness of the stories was there, and the interesting mechanics of the narration were there. But especially in The Wizard Knight, the threads, as they connect, they all have to do with courage and honor. Maybe not all of them. Often it has to do with the character. I should back up a little bit. American kid, 12 or 13-year-olds, winds up in this fantasy land with knights and giants and dragons and gods and princesses and whatnot. He wants to be a knight. He wants to be an honorable knight. And an early review, I think maybe it was by Michael Swanwick, I can't quite remember, an early review said that the main question in the novel is, what makes for an honorable knight? That's what the novel is interrogating. Very frequently, the significant actions, the full significance of which you don't quite see, it has to do with Abel acting in some deeply courageous, honorable way on behalf of someone else or behalf of something he wants to get done for some reason, which will have a ripple effect. Even early stuff in the novel has ripple effects. You don't see the full significance of what he's doing, of the courage with which he is acting. And there's a background of pain to the novel. Almost all of the characters are leading tragic lives. And it's all the more resonant and moving for me because they often don't talk about it. And in some ways, there's a real ordinariness to the characters' lives. They're just farming and hunting and fishing and trying not to get robbed and trying to eke out of existence. But there's deep pain in a lot of the characters' lives. And as Abel acts courageously on behalf of these characters, and as others act courageously on his behalf, and as the significance of that action, sort of the threads of it connects, and you see this vast thing coming through the novel. You see tragedy getting redeemed, and you see characters' lives getting just their wildest, fondest hopes, and beyond what they ever would have hoped, starts to come true in the most beautiful, tender, heartbreaking, beautiful way. There's one character, a female character in the novel. I promise you I'm not spoiling it. If you haven't read it, you read it. I'm not ruining anything in the novel. The main character, excuse me, it's a first-person narrative from this American teenager. He meets her. Nothing particularly special at first. You start to realize the future this young woman is facing. And in fact, at one point later on, there's a ghost who shows to another character what will happen to this young woman if fate grinds itself out. And he falls to the floor and he puts his hands over his eyes and he weeps and he says, stop it, don't make me see this. It's horrifying. And the way her story ends is just so beautiful. It's just so far beyond anything she would have hoped for. There's a character, there's a knight who fights, I'm not spoiling anything by this, there's a knight who fights a dragon and dies. And as you read what happens after he dies, and as you think about certain things he said to other knights, you realize that that is a far happier ending to his story than he ever imagined meeting him. And it's happening all the time. There's a background of pain and to almost all the characters' lives, but Wolfe doesn't leave them there. As you see the threads connect, you see just the happiest things happening to these ordinary people. And that gives the novel a torque and a momentum. This novel just wrecks me every time I read it. I'm just in tears by the end of it, every single time. Another thing I forgot to mention, I should have said this earlier under the second point with the mechanics of the narration. Wolfe has this really, I almost shouldn't say this because it sounds so abstract and like, oh, I don't want to read that. But if I told you this novel really is an interrogation of like how we know stuff, epistemology and identity and memory, you're probably thinking that's not what I want to read. I want to read about dragons and stuff. But it actually is, and it does not get in the way of the story. For reasons I won't get into, the narrator is actually, that would count as a spoiler, so I won't quite say that. Let me just say that in The Wizard Knight and in a number of Wolfe's other important novels, the narrator has significant epistemological limits and is describing the world the best that they can within the limits that they have. One character named Latro is cursed by God to forget everything every time he goes to sleep. So he's writing out the story to remind himself of who people are. One character named Severian claims he has a perfect memory, but you're kind of suspicious as you read that maybe he's not telling you everything. Maybe his memory isn't reliable, as he says. Abel is young. He doesn't understand what's going on, and he narrates things the best he understands as they're happening. But as a first-person narrative, that is your only doorway into this fantasy world. You don't have any other source of information. So you just have to take what he gives you and wait for the full significance of it to play itself out. That fascinates me because that is the position each one of us is in all the time. We're the narrator, as it were, with different epistemological limits, and there's no other independent source of information we can necessarily turn to all the time infallibly. And yet it's very far away from subjectivism. It's not just the narrator's whimsical, untrustworthy subjective impressions. There's a definite hard reality out there that you only see very gradually, and that's getting better. It's getting better. Saying all this, I kind of want to try again. The video's been going on too long already, though. I don't feel like I've done it justice. I cannot describe what this novel does to me, just the way it goes to work on me. And he does it all through just a wonderful story about different worlds and fantasy worlds, different creatures, different, ghosts, elves, dragons, different sorts of demons, and higher gods than that. Please read it. Please give it a try. One word of warning. Wolfe's style, I've come to really like it. It's an extremely brief, clipped narrative style. I've come to really like it. But it's not to everyone's taste. And the way in which stuff is not explained, the extreme lack of explanation, and the way in which it only becomes clear gradually, and only as you connect the dots, it's not really to everyone's taste. When I first read Wizard Knight, the surface of the story was interesting enough for me to keep going. I wanted to find out what happened. I had no idea what was going on. And then I got to the end, and I felt like I'm missing the last fourth of the novel. The novel has no climax. It just ends with the character saying, talk to so-and-so, he'll explain what happened. And I couldn't remember who the character was. Again, I'm not spoiling anything. I'm not ruining anything by saying that if you haven't read it. But the first time I read it, I thought, what? This novel has no ending. What's going on? Then I went back again and found the character that was being referred to and realized where he had come from and who he was and why he mattered. And the novel just mushroomed. I couldn't believe it. But I saw none of that coming. It was just the visible surface of the story. If, as you read, you find the surface of the story fun and you want to keep reading, that's great. Keep going. If it's work for you, if you don't enjoy it, if you have to kind of force yourself to pick it up, then just put it down and read something else. My theory of reading is just read whatever you enjoy. It doesn't matter how trashy some people might say it is. Just read whatever you want to. If you didn't enjoy it, you wouldn't enjoy it if it wasn't meeting some kind of need. So feel free to say, this just isn't grabbing me. But please do give it a chance. It's wonderful. If you've already read it, leave a comment below. I would love to know what you think. If you want to know more about the Writers Collective I'm a part of, website and a little more information down below, please give us a visit. We'd love to have it. I want to read one part of this to you. You will not, if you haven't read the story, you won't know what's happening, so you're safe. I won't ruin it for you. But if you absolutely want to go in blind, stop the video here. This is the finest thing in the world, I said, and thought I spoke solely to myself, words to be lost in the swift wind of the white steeds passing. But Alvid said, it is not but a thing outside the world. Love you a good fight, Sir Abel? No, I said, and looked squarely into my own soul. I fight when honor says I must, and with everything I've got, and I win whatever way I can. She laughed and held me tighter, and her laughter was that strange and thrilling sky sound men hear sometimes and puzzle their heads over afterwards. That is enough for us, and you are a man after my own heart. Will you defend us from the giants of winter and old night? Will you, if we lead you in battle? I'll defend you against anything, I told her, and you don't have to lead me. Nobody does. I'll lead myself, and I'll fight on when any leader you may give me falls. Bending over me, she kissed me as the last syllable left my lips, and it was such a kiss as I have never known, and will never feel again, a kiss that turned all my limbs to iron and lit a fire behind my ribs. Soon after, her steed rolled over as it ran in a most peculiar way, and it could be seen that the Valfather's castle, which had seemed to be above it, was in fact below it, and in a moment more its silver shoes rang on the crystal cobbles of a courtyard. Thanks for watching.